Welcome to Defenders, Dr. William Lane Craig's weekly class at Johnson Ferry Baptist Church in Atlanta. For more information concerning the subjects on which Dr. Craig speaks, visit our website at reasonablefaith.org. You'll find articles, compelling debates, audio-video downloads, an interactive forum, and many more resources. That's reasonablefaith.org.
Because of the rescue of the Chilean miners last week, I didn't have a chance to respond to an editorial that appeared in USA Today by the very prominent evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne, entitled "Religion in America is on the Defensive." And there's a lot to respond to in this editorial, but in interest of time, I'm just going to take one snippet out of the article that I think exemplifies some of the misunderstanding about religion and science that Professor Coyne exemplifies. The article is very angry. It exemplifies a kind of bitterness and anger toward religion that is puzzling to me. But Professor Coyne believes that religion and science are thoroughly incompatible with each other. Now, why does he think this? Well, here's what he says in one paragraph. He says, rather than being enemies or even competitors, the argument goes, science and religion are completely compatible friends, each devoted to finding its own species of truth while yearning for a mutually improving dialogue. So goes the argument. He says, as a scientist and former believer, I see this as bunk. Science and faith are fundamentally incompatible, and for precisely the same reason that irrationality and rationality are incompatible. They are different forms of inquiry, with only one, science, equipped to find real truth. And while they may have a dialogue, it's not a constructive one. Science helps religion only by disproving its claims, while religion has nothing to add to science. So you get there a flavor of the animosity toward religion on the part of this eminent scientist. Now, I think there's a fundamental confusion that underlies this paragraph, and that is, you notice that Professor Coyne equates religion and faith. He thinks of these as synonymous, religion and faith. He uses the terms interchangeably. And it seems to me this is a category mistake. It's like mixing apples and oranges. Religion we can define as a body of doctrine and practice that has to do with God. It's a body of doctrine and attending practices. Faith, by contrast, is trust or commitment in something. And as such, it's not necessarily religious. You can have trust or faith in any number of objects or propositions. So that faith is not necessarily religion. And I think that this misunderstanding comes to fruit in the way he describes religion and in the way he describes faith. I don't think he understands either one of them properly. First, with regard to religion, he thinks of religion as primarily an explanatory enterprise. That the purpose of religion is to explain things. And he says it doesn't do that. Science explains things, and religion doesn't serve to supplement science by explaining anything. And I think that's just fundamentally misconceived. Religion is not, like science, primarily an explanatory enterprise. It's not an attempt to explain things. Indeed, much of religion, when you think about it, is prescriptive. It prescribes how you ought to behave. It describes how you ought to live your life. It is not an explanatory enterprise primarily. So when Professor Coyne says religion has nothing to add to science, what he's thinking there, it doesn't have any explanations to add to science. And what I want to say, well, wholly apart from any explanatory role that religion might serve, Religion adds lots of things to science. For example, it adds the plan of salvation. It tells you how to be rightly related to God, how to find eternal life and forgiveness of sins. That isn't available through science. It gives you a moral code for living. It tells you how to live life in an ethical way. You can't discover moral codes through the test tube or in the laboratory. It also provides a framework in which science can flourish. It's no accident that modern science arose in the incubus, so to speak, of the Christian world and life view within that framework. In the Christian world and life view, the world is not God, nor is the world infested with spirits and polytheistic deities. Rather, the world is distinct from God and is structured according to a rational structure that reflects the mind of God itself and is therefore open to exploration and scientific discovery. So that Christian religion in particular furnishes a framework in which modern science can arise and flourish. So religion adds all sorts of things to science that science cannot do wholly apart from the task of explaining the way the world is. Now, secondly, what about faith? Well, here Professor Coyne thinks of faith fundamentally as belief without warrant. It is belief without justification. Belief without warrant is what he thinks faith is. And again, it seems to me that that's just wrong. Faith or trust or commitment is not necessarily without warrant. Now, sometimes we might just choose to believe something without warrant, and sometimes I think we might be forced to, as William James has said. But nevertheless, for the most part, faith can be based upon good reasons, upon evidence and argument, so that faith is not at all antithetical to reason and rationality. Christianity in particular is a historical religion. It's rooted in events that actually happened, people that actually lived, things that actually went on. And Professor Coyne recognizes this. He talks about factual claims made by religion, and he says, these factual claims, whose truth is a bedrock of belief, bring religion within the sphere of scientific study. I think that's absolutely right. As a historically based religion, Christianity comes within the purview of the historian. But it is not the case then that one simply believes without warrant. Professor Coyne says, rather than relying on reason and evidence to support them, faith relies on revelation, dogma, and authority. Now, certainly there is revelation, I would agree with that, but as a historical religion, you can investigate the Gospels using the ordinary canons of historiography, and what historians have shown is, in fact, that the Gospels are very credible historical sources for the life of Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, we have more information about Jesus of Nazareth than we do for many of the major figures of antiquity, which is really remarkable when you think of how relatively an obscure figure Jesus was. He was a Galilean itinerant preacher with only a 3-year public life at most, and yet we have more historical information about him than we do for many major figures of antiquity. And so faith in him is not just an irrational, warrantless, unjustified leap in the dark. There are good factual grounds for this. Moreover, what Professor Coyne doesn't seem to recognize is that science itself is permeated with assumptions that cannot be scientifically proven. There are certain underlying assumptions that you must make about the world in order to be justified in studying science. For example, the validity of inductive reasoning. Just because A has always been followed by B every time in the past is no proof at all that A will be followed by B tomorrow. We might be at the beginning of a long, chaotic series of A's and B's, and it's just that initial segment that every A has been succeeded by B. The scientist simply has to take it by faith that the world is governed by a kind of principle of regularity that allows inductive reasoning to work. Or even more specifically, in specific scientific theories, there are assumptions that are made that cannot be proven. For example, in the special theory of relativity, Einstein's great theory enunciated in 1905, it simply assumes that the velocity of light is constant in a one-way direction. Now, there's no way to prove that. All we can measure is the round trip velocity of light. But you cannot measure the one-way velocity of light. Theoretically, light could go out at one speed and come back at another, but the round trip velocity is always constant. And that's all we can measure. The theory simply has to assume as a postulate that the one-way velocity of light is constant, but it can't be scientifically proven. Indeed, there are all kinds of basic beliefs that we hold and are perfectly rational in doing so, which can't be scientifically proven. Things like the reality of the external world. You can't prove that you're not a brain in a vat, being wired with electrodes by a mad scientist to make you think there's an external world. The reality of the past. There isn't any way to prove that the world wasn't created 5 minutes ago with built-in traces of age, when in fact nothing is older than 5 minutes. The reality of other minds. There's no way to prove that in addition to yourself, there are other minds around you. These other people around you could all just be sort of androids or automata that look like they have an interior life, but really they're just soulless, robot-like entities. None of this can be proved scientifically, and yet we're rational in believing these things. You'd have to be crazy to think that you're a brain in a vat or that the world was created 5 minutes ago. And so these beliefs cannot be scientifically proven. I think Professor Coyne would say, well, we just have to take them by faith. I would prefer to say they are part of the deliverances of reason, but what they are is their basic beliefs. They're foundational, properly basic beliefs. And of course, the question then arises, well, why can't belief in God be a properly basic belief too? Why couldn't the reality of God be grounded in the experience of God himself in the same way that our belief in the reality of the external world is grounded in our sense perceptions of the external world? Professor Coyne just doesn't address these sort of questions. So I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding here on his part, both of religion, which he thinks is primarily an explanatory enterprise when it's not, and then secondly, his understanding of faith as being something that is belief without warrant, just a leap in the dark, which it's not, and which in fact science also shares with religion in committing itself to certain basic beliefs and unproved postulates.
For more resources from Dr. William Lane Craig, visit our website at reasonablefaith.org. You'll find articles, debates, audio-video downloads, and much more. That's reasonablefaith.org. The copyright for this material is owned by Dr. William Lane Craig.